Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife and sharing some fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. My guest today is Professor Joyce Harper, and I'm impossibly excited to introduce you to her. She is a Professor of Reproductive Science at the Institute for Women's Health at the University College in London, and she has worked in the fields of fertility, genetics, reproductive health, and women's health for over 30 years. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
It's fabulous to have you here. And by way of explaining how we connected, we connected first over Twitter because we were both a little bit perturbed about the menopause discussion on there. But first off, I would like to know, what is your mission?
My mission is to educate women about their health from their adolescence through their fertile years and through to the menopause. We don't educate women in schools or beyond about their health, and there are some really key pieces of information that we need to know at all of those three stages. So my mission is to ensure that women understand about their health so they can make their own informed decisions about how they want to live their life and any treatments or whatever they're going to take for anything in their life, but they need to be taught that information first.
And what we do know is kind of limited, isn't it? Because, we might learn about our reproductive health, but nobody knows anything about menopause. And it's a shock and a surprise to so many women. I mean, I know it was a shock for me when it happened at 41, but that was shocking. But most women, even when they're going into their 50s, they're surprised that this is happening to them, aren't they?
The terrible thing is we all use Dr. Google, which is fine. But the terrible thing with the menopause is that often women don't realize that they're having symptoms of the menopause because they don't know anything about it. So what happens is that they start having symptoms in their 40s, don't realize the symptoms they're having are menopausal. Then they might suffer for several years, and then they realize something clicks or conversation. Then they Google it, and then they have a light bulb moment. This is to do with the menopause. And I have even one of my really good friends, she's a professor, had deep depression in her late 40s and didn't realize for several years that depression was one of the symptoms of the menopause. And, then now is absolutely fine. But we need to try and get this information to women before the event, not after the event, so that they can really understand the menopause.
I loved the recent BBC Week all about menopause. I know you were involved in that, weren't you? And I loved that for a change there was a positive slant to menopause there, because I know you and I, both of us, we don't see it as this big negative thing. And post-menopause, we're feeling great, aren't we? But the one thing that perturbed me was that there was still this overemphasis on HRT, and I get very concerned about the over-medicalization of menopause and the reliance on HRT, because there's so much else that we can do, isn't there?
So I've never had so many negative responses on social media as when I talk about HRT. And I think HRT has a place for some women who really have severe symptoms. But I'm just worried about some women's view of it. So one comment I wrote on Twitter a while ago was, I do not think every woman should be on HRT. And the negative comments I got from that were unbelievable. They're also very upsetting. I really don't believe that every woman needs to take HRT. And you've used the word medicalised, and that's the word I use. I think if you're taking any pill or potion or having any medical procedure, you are medicalising. And these women say, no, we're just restoring our hormonal balance. But going through the menopause is a natural event for women when they're finishing their reproductive years. And a lot of people say taking HRT is not medicalising it. But we are going against what's normal. we are prolonging these hormones in our body that I think should stop being in our body. And I certainly, people on Twitter always talk about themselves, but I will say that I know from my experience, I feel really the best ever without having menstrual cycles and having gone through the menopause. And I really believe that for the majority of women, they can overcome this and lead this wonderful time in their 50s without having to daily put a patch on or take a pill to keep these hormones in their body.
Yeah, because even when you're having the so-called more natural body identical or bio-identical, which often get blurred around the lines, and then there are private practitioners who are touting one sort, and actually you can probably get it from your GP. That's certainly what I had. It's still processed, as you say. It's still, whether it's a patch, or I used to take a gel for my early menopause, and so I used to put that on every day, and the tablet. So those are coming from yams. But it's still, as you say, it's highly processed, isn't it? It's not it in its natural form. So why not try and get those more natural phytoestrogens into our bodies in a more natural way rather than taking a medicine?
I totally agree. I think we really need to think about whether we need to do this. Is it something that we can get through without medicalizing it? And I think we need to really embrace it. But being a scientist, we have to do long-term studies of what these effects will have on women. And one issue is that we keep changing the lotions and potions we're giving for HRT. So it's really impossible almost to do long-term studies with what women are taking now, because again, I think it will change in the next few years. There were long-term studies done quite a few years ago, and they had a negative impact on the use of HRT, and that's when HRT use really went down. And they had shown an increase with, for example, cancer and some issues with cardiovascular disease. But the data, even from these studies, is very complicated. So we do need more studies, and we really need to make sure they're robust studies so that we can really figure out what this long-term effect would be on women. But then we are being the guinea pigs, because if we're the ones that are now taking these new formulas, we are going to be the ones in our 60s and 70s who are the scientists, such as me, will be looking at to see, oh, what did this have? What effect did this have on these women? And then it's too late. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will find out that the women that took these are much healthier than women who didn't. But for me, it just doesn't seem right that we give every woman some pills and potions to prolong this when this really isn't the natural situation.
I'm absolutely in agreement with you, which is why I reached out to you on Twitter, because it just drives me nuts. And also there's so much fear around menopause and the whole aspect of shame and everything else that women have. And yet many of us are able to go through it with little impact on our lives. And I have this theory that menopause symptoms are like Mother Nature's way, or our body's way of saying, okay, girl, you've lived your life in a certain way and I'm not happy with you. And I'm going to give you some menopause symptoms now to tell you that I'm not happy about you. So actually, when you get those symptoms, you can say, thank you very much, menopause, because you're telling me. And we know, you and I, we know that caffeine is going to cause a hot flush. Alcohol is going to cause a hot flush and anxiety, let alone that, and sugar, when processed foods, all of these things that, yes, we may enjoy, but it doesn't, in my mind, make sense to stick the band-aid of HRT on the symptoms rather than looking at the underlying reasons and trying to do something about that so that we set ourselves up for long-term health.
I totally agree with you. I always talk about the 4 pillars of well-being, and you are right. If we're not taking these on board in our 40s and 50s, we are really doing an injustice to our health. We have to think about our nutrition. I know people drink so much caffeine. To be honest, I've never drunk a cup of coffee in my life. But I know people love their caffeine. They don't want me to tell them you've got to cut down. They don't want to cut down on their glass of wine in the evening. They say it relaxes them. And I say, just go for a few weeks with not drinking any alcohol during the week. See how it affects your sleep and your mood. Because yes, it's a lovely pick-me-up for a few hours, but whatever comes up has to come down. Then exercise. I'm an absolute advocate for exercise. I have exercised all my life, and I'm an ambassador for This Girl Can, which is the UK campaign to encourage women and girls to exercise, because women in every culture that's been looked at exercise less than men. And the effect of exercise on our long-term health is really significant, including our overall weight if we're obese. These affects cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc., which can be really reduced by good nutrition and good exercise. But then we also have sleep. So many people don't get enough sleep. They're always tired, and it shows on their face. You can tell who's not sleeping. Really important to get your good sleep, and that glass of wine and that cup of coffee are not going to help. All that sugar. And then lastly, our overall well-being. So our anxiety, our stress, it is important. I'm very active, but people think I don't relax. We all need to relax, whether it's meditation, having a quiet walk, or having a quiet 10 minutes every day to just let our body reset. So those 4 pillars of well-being are really our wake-up call in our 40s and 50s. And I love your idea about this is our bodies telling us, hey girl, it's time to take these on board. But unfortunately, so many women I speak to who've never sorted out any of them, they look at me in horror as if, what are you asking? No, I don't want to do any of those things. I'm going to continue to live my life. And that's absolutely fine. But I want to make sure women have an informed decision about how they're going to live their life.
Yeah, I have women in my community who would much rather have, their daily alcohol and have the HRT. And as you said earlier, we just don't know what the long-term implications of the HRT are. So personally, I'd rather just not. As my history, some listeners will already know, I went through early menopause at 41. I was advised to take HRT to protect my bones and heart because of the early menopause. I think that diagnosis was actually wrong. I think it'd be very different now, because under 50, it's got to be 2 years before you have, your last period for you to be categorized as having gone through menopause. But at that time, that was the thinking, which is 12 years ago now. And eventually, after much toing and froing, I went on HRT, but I always planned to come off it at so-called normal menopause age of 51. And I did that, and I have managed any symptoms after that completely naturally. And I know for a fact, that the alcohol will cause a hot flush, because if I have a drink, I'll have a hot flush. And if I have a bar of chocolate, I'll have a hot flush. And that's my choice. But as you say, it's so important that women know these things and they know how they can naturally deal with it, because I think there is just too much dependent on this drug, isn't there?
And I totally agree. And I think the other issue that women have is that if they've heard anything about the menopause, it's so negative. Oh, there's terrible things are going to happen to you, and you're going to bleed forever, and you're going to have these hot flushes all the time, and you won't be able to function. And I think if you go into anything with a really negative view, where's it going to go? It's very hard to get it back up to a positive level. So I think we really need to address that the menopause it can be a very positive thing. I'm giving a talk tomorrow to Women's Health Conference. My menopause slide, is very positive. It says, brilliant, no more periods. I mean, for me, that's a no-brainer. I absolutely love not having a period. It's just, I was very much affected by the whole cycles, the premenstrual syndrome, and then just bleeding. I'm very active. I do lots of sports, and even if you're coping well with it, it's not the easiest thing to do. I'm going to a festival this weekend. If you're having your period at these sorts of things, swimming, it's just not nice for women to deal with, and men don't have to do it. So why don't we get on their page and just stop these menstrual cycles that we have, and when it's natural for us to do it, and just enjoy being free from them. I think with your older age, I think comes wisdom. I think for many women, they've achieved so many things on their list, you know, their education, their career, a home, whether or not they wanted children, love, you know, all these things now. And your 40s and 50s, you can now become selfish and think, right, I'm going to do the things I want to do. And that's one thing I'm really enjoying at this time of my life. I mean, my kids are still teenagers, so I have some restrictions, but you know, I basically do what I want to do around them. I know that there will come a time soon when I'll be even freer and really be able to embrace life even more. And I think that women should be really encouraged and think positively of this key stage in their life.
Absolutely. I mean, I just love that. I mean, one, I love being off the estrogen roller coaster.
Yes.
Because, my goodness me, we are a slave to it, aren't we? And we're no longer a slave to it. And as you say, we can then start putting ourselves first and not, you know, we're not so driven to nurture everybody else, and we can actually start nurturing ourselves. So I really also see it as a time of such enormous potential in a woman's life. You know, it's transformative. It's amazing.
But for me, I felt certain. I didn't realize this until I was through it, but I felt that when I was having my menstrual cycle, I felt quite foggy. And they talk about menopause fog and brain fog. But I felt that when I was through the menopause, my brain feels so clear, and that fog has gone. I think much more articulately. I clear. I'm having full of ideas. I think my memory now is better than it's ever been, and it's just like a sparkle. In China, they call the menopause the second spring, and I really, really feel that it's such an amazing time. And I do meet many women who feel like I do. The trouble on things like social media is it's the ones who are having issues that shout the loudest. So we get very negative view. I did do a survey a few months ago when I asked women post-menopause, how are they feeling? Are they feeling the same as they've always felt, better or worse? And the majority said they felt better than they'd ever felt. But those ones that feel better, you know, they're off doing great things rather than shouting about it on Twitter. So I think we have to put things in perspective. And as I said, it's the data, the clinical data is that only 20% of women have major symptoms. I put a slide from a GP training day that we did on the menopause a few weeks ago, and I put a slide saying similar, it did use quite provocative words. And the clinician that put it up, it said that 70% of women sail through the menopause. I think that was a bit provocative.
That was a bit.
Put it up there to see what they'd say. But I think what he meant was that 70% of women do not need to medicalize. So it's between 20 and 30% that have issues. They're the ones that need to have things addressed and look at professional ways, whether it's cognitive behavior therapy or other things that they can do in their lives to try and overcome this transient phase. It is a transient phase. And people do talk about the long-term risks of not having estrogen in your system, such as osteoporosis and cardiovascular disease. I really believe, from everything I've looked at, that if you have your 4 pillars of well-being really under control with your exercise and your nutrition, and genetics is partly at risk of both of those issues. And if you monitor them, so I regularly ask my GP for a bone density scan to check, because I also went through the menopause quite young. But I think there are ways, but they are an effort, and maybe not every woman would want to, but that's their choice. So it's something that they have to decide. But as long as they're fully aware that you can live this very healthy life and have a wonderful time.
I mean, I think it's interesting from my perspective. I went through the early menopause. You might think that I have this negative thinking about it, but I don't. And actually, the only reason I found out was because I had a hormone test. Clearly, my periods must have been sporadic at least, but I
Yeah.
had no other symptoms, and I had a hormone test because I was trying for another child. And that other child I obviously wasn't able to have. But it was only because of that I found out. So I had no symptoms, and I carried on having no symptoms. Now, why that was, I don't know. I think there are reasons why my hormones went haywire early. I think the fact that I had a very stressful career before that didn't help. I'm learning more about air pollution affecting, when we go through menopause. There's been reports about that recently, and I've always lived in very highly polluted places. But there's all sorts of reasons. But I didn't actually have any symptoms. And since I came off the HRT, I mean, I'm sort of classic, time now, I'm 53. I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. As you say, I love being post-menopause. It's brilliant. Yeah. So it's just fantastic. So is there anything, obviously, we share this desire to get the information out there. Is there anything else you want to make sure that women know about their own health or menopause specifically?
Yeah, no, I think so. When we did the BBC Breakfast, the piece I was involved with was a positive view. So we got a group of women that all felt very positively about the menopause, and we shared our stories. And obviously, they only played a small amount, but it was a wonderful day that we had together. And we were so positive about our lives and about where we were now and how wonderful it is. And so, I think if we can encourage women to think positively and lead that healthy life, I think that will help many, many women get through this time. But being aware, I didn't have huge symptoms. I said, my comment used to be, I've exercised through the menopause. I just upped my exercise, and I've always exercised, which got more things under control, and certainly cut down on alcohol. I've met too many people that say, "Oh, my glass of wine is wonderful." No, think about it. But so I would say to any woman, if you are having symptoms, then really think about your lifestyle. If you feel you are really leading that healthy lifestyle, but things are still not working out, then go and certainly ask for medical help. I think GPs are really limited in their knowledge. You might be lucky and have a wonderful GP, but I think some are limited in their knowledge. And so ideally, we have menopause experts. So ideally, you would get referred to one. But there is a lot to take in if you feel that you're having these real issues around the menopause. I would just read as much as you can, get different advice. What one doctor, even a menopause expert, might say, another might tell you the absolute opposite. It's the same with fertility. I hear this all the time. Two doctors told me something totally opposite. And that's because there's no one answer. So really read around and try things, and try everything you can, and do what suits you. We're all individuals. So there is absolutely no one answer fits all. We have to try different things and just see what works for you.
And I think with the doctors, I mean, I agree that the knowledge sometimes is a bit woeful. And when they do know things, it's HRT, and it's not all the other things that need to be considered, particularly, I think, the nutrition aspect, because nutrition is such a small part of doctor training, isn't it? Which drives me nuts. Another thing, because we don't think holistically, we don't think preventatively in the West, do we? We just fix the problem when it happens. But things that have saved me, I'm absolutely convinced. I don't drink dairy milk anymore. I have soya milk, organic soya milk. And I have flax seeds every day. I grind them up and I have them on my cereal. And I'm convinced that those have really helped with my menopause symptoms, because both of them are really good sources of natural phytoestrogens. And I will be taking them probably forever. I won't stop taking them. I'll just have them, and they're fine.
Yeah. And another important thing about HRT, if a woman is on HRT, it has to really be tailored to her very individually. So she does need to have her blood levels checked. And so it's really quite in depth. She really would need to read up on it and try probably to educate her doctor. If she reads up, she might well know more than her doctor. But the important message is that women should do whatever's right for them as individuals, for sure.
So one thing I also wanted to talk to you about is this idea that that people should be on estrogen replacement therapy forever. What's that all about?
So I can't think of anything worse. I think we should think about our mothers and our grandmothers who never took any of these things. So my mum lived a very active life till 92. They weren't on these things, and they're fine. Again, it's an individual choice. Those that have seen the documentary that Mirella Folstrop did, her gynecologist at the end said women should take HRT forever. Again, if that's what they want to do, but there is no evidence at all what this is doing, good or bad. So, as I said, we are being the guinea. Anyone doing this would be the guinea pigs. So they need to think about whether this is right for them. What's interesting is I've heard a number of talks, all by men, who feel that we should use medical technology to postpone the menopause. So tomorrow I'm hearing a talk by Simon Fischel about this particular topic, but I've heard a few already. And they're suggesting that women have some of their ovaries removed, and that the clinics freeze this tissue. And then what would happen was that the tissue in small slices would be over several years replaced back into the body. It could even be put in the arm, but it would then be releasing hormones. It wouldn't be releasing eggs, but it would be releasing hormones, which they call a natural restoration of your menstrual cycle. But it's not natural. That's quite unnatural. But they're suggesting that you then have periods forever. And I really can't think of anything worse. That's the one welcome thing. I think one of the many welcome things about the menopause is that there's no more menstrual cycle. And whenever I've heard these talks, I've always asked, everyone looks at me, I've always asked the question of the audience in the room, maybe several hundred people, any women in the audience feel that they'd like to do this? And not one person yet has put up their hand. Now, I'm sure there are women, but I have asked Simon Fischel before, has he done the studies to ask women whether this is what they want? Now, there may well be women listening to this who say, yes, I would love to have this treatment done. I would love to have periods forever and never go through the menopause. But for me, this makes no sense at all. As I said, all the benefits of being postmenopausal, so that fog lifting from my brain, no more periods, no more cycling, every 12 months of the year, everything cycling. For me, those were very negative things in my life, and now they've all gone, and I feel a very positive view of my life. So for me personally, prolonging this and delaying the menopause would have been something I wouldn't have wanted to entertain. But I'd love to hear to any of the people listening to this whether this is something that they would welcome. I can't see the advantage. They say osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease. I think that's a big price to pay to maybe prevent something that you may never get. And there are other ways of preventing those as well.
Absolutely, there are so many other ways, aren't there? But I have an anecdote to share on that one. I think it may have been the same gynecologist at an event I was at. And she was telling the audience that she had a patient, and this is a private gynecologist, telling about a patient who was in her 80s and was delighted to still be having periods because she was on HRT. And I just thought, but that's so wrong. We're supposed to go through menopause. I mean, I know people will be saying, but it's her choice. But is it really? I mean, why does a woman in her 80s want to have periods to feel relevant, to feel good about herself?
We do have this view that being women, we need to have our menstrual cycle. And I've heard many women of different ages talk about using hormonal contraception, and that they like to have the breakthrough bleed, even though it's false and it's not really needed with the contraceptive pill. And also they don't like to have an implant because they don't have a period. And I don't know how we've installed that into our minds, that being a woman, you have to have a menstrual cycle. I really was so happy to stop having those. And again, I think this is something that we've ingrained in our culture, and I would like to see us move this out of our culture, as well as the negative views to aging and the negative views to the menopause. I think they're just the way we're thinking about things, and I think we can readdress it and re-educate us to realize that actually all of this is very positive and we don't need to think negatively about it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. It would really help me get the message out and inspire more women to feel empowered in midlife and beyond if you left me a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you may be listening to this. And share this podcast with your friends too. If you'd like to take your own midlife up a notch, why not join our members club? It's where you'll find the strategies, support and connection you need to live the very best next phase of life. You can find out more and get the show notes for this episode at magnificentmidlife.com. Help me change the world one midlife woman at a time.